Death is all around us. It's everywhere. Every day we're continually bombarded with images of death on our TV screens, in the many armed conflicts, in accidents, in natural disasters, and in dramas, many of which involve murder and killing. We simply can't escape death. But all may not be as it seems, because, astonishing as it sounds, death isn't fatal, final, or permanent, but a regular occurrence. Death, like breathing and eating, is one of the things which we all have in common. It isn't a matter of choice, and yet it remains many people's greatest fear. It's not something we talk about much because death's a killer, especially in polite conversation. Death is a distasteful topic for many. It repels and fascinates us in equal measure. Bring it up and you're accused of being morbid. Some people prefer not to think about it at all until the gnarled hand of the Grim Reaper comes a-calling. This film has two aims. Firstly, to put death in its proper context and show that it isn't so much an end as the beginning of a new cycle. The second purpose is to attempt to take the dread out of death. Thanks to medical science, improved living conditions and better nutrition, people these days live far longer than their ancestors ever did. From time to time you'll get a scientist popping up predicting that very soon we'll all be living to 150 years old. But death isn't a tragedy. Death as oblivion or annihilation is just a pernicious myth, an illusion. Look on it more as a liberation, as the ultimate career move, promotion into a higher but non-physical realms. If you believe, as I do, that we've all been born and we've died many times before and we've repeated this process, you'd think that we might be getting used to it by now. Well, it seems that many people haven't. Since death causes such acute fear and anxiety, people will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid it. After all, survival is the most powerful human instinct of all. For this very reason, some people with more money than sense choose to spend small fortunes having their bodies, or parts of them, cryogenically frozen at sub-zero temperatures after death. Here they're stored in temperature-controlled silos until a time when medical science can overcome whatever it was that killed them. This is, of course, absurd nonsense, and it shows a complete ignorance of who human beings really are. Even if they were revived, the eternal essence, the soul if you like, would have long departed. You'd be left with a zombie. And even the briefest flirtation with the ageless wisdom teachings reveal that human beings are already on an eternal evolutionary journey. So, if you're going to return to this planet, why bother turning yourself into a giant ice cube? Apart from the terminally ill, those facing execution, or those choosing to commit suicide, no one's sure of the precise time of their death. This adds to the uncertainty. Attitudes to death vary enormously depending on your culture, your religion, and your location. The way we perceive the world around us is largely shaped by the dominant materialistic mindset of the 21st century. This short-sighted view of ourselves and everything around us assures us that only the physical world exists and nothing else. This materialistic paradigm confidently asserts that there are no subtle or concealed dimensions or hidden kingdoms of nature. What you see is all there is. Materialists ridicule the idea put forward by the wise sages, the seers and the initiates of all the ages that the physical world is only the visible outward sign of a much grander and deeper reality. Inevitably, having a wholly materialistic worldview not only shapes the way we regard life, but death too. Material science dislikes and derides notions of soul or spirit or some essential non-physical essence which survives the death of the body. The problem is that materialists demand physical proof of something that's entirely non-material, the survival of the soul. Despite the cynicism and skepticism in the West, many hundreds of millions of people around the world believe that they've lived before and will live again. As we'll see, belief in rebirth can profoundly affect both our consciousness and behaviour. If we know we'll be here again at some point, will this make us act differently in this life? Will it make us more compassionate or generous? With some people it can, with others less so. Death has shaped human evolution. Inescapable and inevitable, it's evoked a vast range of responses from human beings. Religions and spiritual traditions have had much to say on the subject. Some religions, such as Christianity and Islam, promise their faithful an eternal afterlife in heaven or paradise. Others, such as Buddhism or Hinduism, firmly believe in rebirth. Many others are convinced that death is a grand finale with no curtain calls. Death and the journey into the afterlife were central to the religious and social practices of the ancient Egyptians. Life itself was organized around death. At the heart of this was the belief that a vital part of the individual remained near the body after death, and so this had to be preserved and sustained with food and with drink. Affluent Egyptians went to extraordinary lengths to ensure that the soul would have a smooth onward journey. They famously mummified the dead and produced ornate sarcophagi covered in protective symbolic imagery. This is a replica of the famous pharaoh Tutankhamun's final resting place. The Celts and their priest class, the Druids, believed in an otherworld known as Anwen, a place of boundless joy and immortality which existed adjacent to the physical world. It was said to be accessible to humans at specific times of the year. Death pervades the many Greek myths and legends, although they saw it as a dreary place with an underworld known as Hades. Their view was that humans were mortal and only the gods were able to enjoy eternity. The majority of Native American traditions believe that the spirit survives the death of the physical body, although there are many different variations among different tribes. For example, the Sioux believe the soul departs to a spiritual location known as the Happy Hunting Grounds, which resembled their homeland on the Great Plains of North America. Until the end of the 19th century, certainly in the West, there were highly rigid beliefs about what happens when we die, largely shaped by the prevailing Christian beliefs of that era. Heaven or hell were the only options which awaited you, with possibly a purifying stint in purgatory thrown in for good measure. That view was challenged by possibly the most remarkable woman of the 19th century, a Russian aristocrat, an adventuress, a writer and a visionary 99% of people have never even heard of. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky was born into a noble family in 1831. Aged 17, she ran away from a disastrous early marriage to an army officer after just a few days and embarked on a 2-decade-long tour of Central Asia, India, the Middle East, Europe, Africa, as well as North and South America. This was a remarkable feat for anyone of that time, and even more so for a woman. Madame Blavatsky even managed to infiltrate herself into Tibet then a kingdom forbidden to foreigners. And she was even wounded fighting for Garibaldi's forces in Italy in the 1850s. She survived numerous hardships, accidents, and at least 2 shipwrecks as she travelled the world seeking new, or rather ancient, knowledge, buried deeply in various spiritual traditions, especially those of India. She met initiates and a succession of wise individuals in a quest she believed was guided by higher beings. In 1875, she was one of the co-founders of the Theosophical Society, an organisation set up specifically to disseminate these ancient ideas and promote the formation of a new brotherhood of humanity. The society also dedicated itself to studying comparative religions and exploring human beings' vast but hidden powers. She wrote numerous books and articles outlining these ideas, especially in her most important work, her monumental The Secret Doctrine, first published in 1888 and which has never been out of print. This is a remarkable and challenging book. In it she writes, "We accept consciousness after death and say the real consciousness and the real freedom of the ego or the soul begins only after the physical death of man. It's then that it's no longer impeded by terrestrial matter, that it's free, that it can perceive everything." Madame Blavatsky's mission was to see timeless truths and universal laws reintroduced into the West to counteract the combined corrosive influences of Christianity and ever more materialistic science. These universal laws included the then radical notion of reincarnation, with human beings continually being reborn in new bodies as they engaged in endless cycles of evolution. Blavatsky stated that human beings were far, far more than science or conventional religions allowed them to be, progressing through endless physical lives towards greater degrees of sophistication. They were nothing less than gods in the making. This idea is as difficult for many people to accept today as it was back then. So Blavatsky can be described as the destroyer of death, if death means oblivion and the extinction of all consciousness. For a great many people, it's not so much death itself which haunts them, but the process of dying, especially if this is a prolonged and painful business involving the surrendering of independence and dignity. Hospitals, and especially hospices, have made huge strides in helping people to make this important transition so that loved ones can be nearby and that suffering is minimized. Of course, these days a great many people die in a medical setting. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, one of the pioneers of the hospice movement, identified 5 typical shifts in attitude among terminally ill people. Firstly, there's denial. Oh, maybe the medical staff have made a wrong diagnosis. Secondly, there's anger. Why is this happening to me? Thirdly, there's bargaining. I'll change my lifestyle if you let me live. Fourthly, there's depression. All hope seems to be gone. And finally, there's acceptance. Turmoil vanishes and an inner calm appears. Often during a person's final days or hours, perhaps slipping in and out of consciousness, they may appear to be communicating with invisible beings. Those at their bedside usually see nothing. What's happening is that the barrier between the physical and the subtle worlds is becoming more porous. Those in the final stages of life perceive the beings in this hidden realm, sometimes dead friends or family members. The ancient traditions tell us that the manner and the atmosphere in which we depart from life is very important and may have an influence on our onward journey. Inflamed emotions and outpourings of grief by those at the bedside can act as a severe hindrance. Humans can essentially be divided into 2 distinct parts.
There's the temporary part, which vanishes along with the body after physical death. We'll call this the personality. And then there are the deeper, more subtle parts which continue after death and are ultimately reborn in new bodies. This is the soul or individuality which doesn't die. And it's this individuality which is the real person, not the temporary, here today, gone tomorrow personality. The truth is, we know far more about our personalities than we do about our souls. Some people don't even believe in such a thing as the soul. Many refuse to accept their own immortality. We've developed a dismal and distorted view of death, and by doing so, we've degraded the dying process itself and turned it into something negative and fearful. Believing physical death to be the end of everything is anti-life and possibly the ultimate superstition.
One of the core ideas of the ageless wisdom is that there's nothing but life in the universe. In fact, there's only one life. So we and everything else are fragments of that one life, that single reality. Each fragment is intimately interconnected to every other. The separation we feel is an illusion. Each of these fragments has a destiny, and this is to progressively evolve into higher forms by rebirth through endless cycles. Death of the physical form is simply a regular part of that process of evolution.
But all cycles have exactly the same pattern, whether they apply to a butterfly, a human being, or a cluster of galaxies. They're born into physical form, they grow and develop through infancy and childhood into adulthood. They reach a high point of maturity and then begin a period of decline, which ultimately results in the death of the physical form. The essence of that form is preserved on the inner planes before being reborn to begin a new cycle.
So, exactly what happens when we stop breathing, when our hearts stop pumping, and when all electrochemical activity ceases in the brain? The physical shell is now redundant. But does this mean that our consciousness has also been permanently extinguished? On the contrary, it means that our consciousness has a new lease of life. At death, there's an invisible silver cord which severs, and our connection with the earth is over for the time being. Many people who've diced with death in one form or another and survived tell us, "My life flashed before my eyes." And this is precisely what happens to us immediately after death. We engage in what's usually called a life review. This unfolds for many hours and even days after death as we rerun each and every event of our lives, beginning with the most recent and progressing backwards. The crucial thing here is that this review isn't a cozy home movie. The purpose of it is to show the effect that our behaviour, our actions, our words and our emotions have impacted on those with whom we've been involved in various ways. For some, this will be a painful process. Human beings' energizing principle, sometimes known as the etheric or vital body, which surrounds and interpenetrates the physical body, dissolves and decays in the next 24 to 48 hours after death, sometimes a little longer. During physical life, this etheric system conducts vital energy, known in Sanskrit as prana or in China as qi, around the body. Some people with strong emotional or material attachments to the earth, or those who believe that things have been left undone, are often very reluctant to relinquish this physical link. They're unable to move on. This phenomenon produces ghosts in graveyards, poltergeists, or shimmering figures in haunted houses. Parallel to the physical world with which we're all so familiar and enmeshed is an entirely separate, non-physical dimension of existence known as the astral world. Astral is taken from the Latin word astrum, which means star, because this plane of existence has a star-like quality. This realm provides a template for everything in the material world. Everything physical has its astral counterpart. And this realm is hardly unknown to us, since we visit it every night when we go to sleep. It's important to know that unlike the physical world, the astral is a subjective rather than an objective realm. It reflects the inner feelings of those occupying it and is often called the emotional or desire world. If, when you die, you expect to meet horned devils, or indeed nothing at all, then you probably will. What you expect, you're likely to get. Essentially, the astral world is a kind of celestial refinery, a place of purification where an individual's undesirable elements are removed and more noble ones preserved for use in future lives. It's similar, but not exactly the same, as the Christian idea of purgatory. Certainly in the secret traditions, there's no Christian notion of hell.
Many people spend their time in the astral realm in a state of unconsciousness or dreamlike state. Depending on their spiritual evolution, some may retain a greater degree of awareness. So how long do we spend in this particular realm? Well, again, it depends on a person's degree of spiritual development. Some advanced individuals may pass through it in hours, days, weeks, or months. Others may spend years, decades, or even centuries if there's much purification to be done. The average stay here is the equivalent of a third of one's physical life. The astral world is said to be divided into subplanes or compartments for different levels of development. But there are exceptions. Those killed in wars, for example, are said to be reborn fairly quickly, usually within a few years. And this may help to explain why there's nearly always a spike in the birth rate immediately after major conflicts.
There appears to be a different dynamic for those who die in accidents or suffer violent deaths, and particularly for those who commit suicide. When people take their own lives, there's a delay before reincarnation. Human beings aren't the only occupants of the astral world. It's a very busy place. There are also the astral bodies of dead animals. Additionally, there are various nature spirits, such as fairies, elves and gnomes, which exist in this dimension. The majority of people believe these are purely imaginary or the stuff of fairy tales and legends. They're not. But the largest population in the astral world consists of human thought forms based on emotion and desire. Those created consciously can exist for long periods of time. Those created unconsciously tend to dissipate quickly. For the less spiritually evolved, the astral world is the final destination after death. They will reincarnate directly from this realm. For the more evolved, there's another port of call, an even more refined realm known as the mental or the heaven world. In Sanskrit, this is known as Devachan, which literally means the abode of the gods or the land of the shining ones. This is a place of sheer peace and beauty without pain or conflict, a perfect paradise, perhaps similar to the Christian idea of heaven. It's a refuge for rest and recuperation before the next physical life, and it's as far removed from the astral world as the astral is from the physical. It's viewed as a reward for service on earth. Before this, there's a second life review, along similar lines to that following the shedding of the physical body. This is sometimes called the second death. The heaven world, a realm of pure consciousness, is also divided into a number of different strata, depending on the degree of the soul's development. So, how long do we inhabit this place of bliss? There's no easy answer to this, and there are vastly differing assertions. Some Buddhists claim that there's a mere 49 days between incarnations. Madame Blavatsky put the figure at 1,500 years, and the Greek philosopher Plato at 1,000. It would seem that it depends upon the needs of individual souls. Ultimately, there comes an impulse to take on physical form once again. It appears that some souls are unwilling to do this and may have to be prompted by higher beings. This process involves choosing a new body and, as incredible as this may sound, one's parents. It involves the choice of an appropriate set of circumstances, location, social position, gender and era, depending on an individual's karma.
We're continually reborn in new bodies, and at the end of each incarnation we shed those bodies and spend time on the inner planes, usually far longer than we do on the material plane. Belief in reincarnation extends back into the furthest reaches of history and covers many different cultures and eras. Although there are many different variations, the idea is much the same. We reincarnate hundreds or even thousands of times before we reach a point where we no longer need physical form.
Reincarnation was a central belief among many Native American tribes. They desired to have an honourable death on the battlefield to ensure a happy return to a new body. This fearlessness of war was shared by the Celts and their priest class, the Druids. The Vikings and other Norse societies also had a visceral disregard for death, believing that the bravery and suffering in this life would ennoble the next one. Reincarnation was a core belief of the Persian Magi, the ancient civilizations of Central and South America, the Zoroastrians and the Essenes, of which Jesus was a member. The after-death journey of the soul was a key feature of the various mystery schools of the past, which existed in China, the Middle East, Greece, Europe, and the Americas. They taught candidates for initiation all about the survival of the soul. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all preach monotheism, a belief in a single God. All three now deny reincarnation, but it wasn't always that way. The Bible is full of references to reincarnation, and during his 3-year mission, Jesus often spoke about it. In the book of John, Jesus says, "I'm the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die." For the first few centuries of its existence, Christianity did preach reincarnation. But over time, the church authorities began to outlaw beliefs in it. This was finally forbidden at the Second Council of Constantinople in the year 553, and the church still teaches that souls exist for one life only. After death, it's dispatched to purgatory, followed by everlasting peace in heaven or suffering in hell. How different the world might have been had the church retained its belief in rebirth. The idea that you only get one life and never return is a comparatively recent phenomenon. As the American comedian and filmmaker Woody Allen put it, "I didn't believe in reincarnation in my last life, and I still don't." So let's ask a basic question. Why do we reincarnate? It can be explained simply in 3 words: evolution, education, and experience. The purpose of all life is to develop and to ascend into higher forms. To achieve anything in a single life is both an impossibility and an absurdity. Reincarnation explains the vast differences in people's moral, spiritual, and intellectual capacities. Some have been reborn many more times than others. Until the mid-20th century, the Western world largely regarded reincarnation as another quaint Oriental eccentricity. Few accepted it. But this began to change during the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s, when esoteric and exotic Eastern spiritual ideas began creeping into Western popular culture via music, books and films. Since then, it's gained even more traction in Europe and America. Opinion surveys show that up to a third of people believe in rebirth of some kind, even among Christians whose current doctrine teaches otherwise, and surprisingly, even among atheists. A great many people would love to die peacefully in their beds at the age of 101. A few do, most don't. There seems to be no apparent logic in how long we live. Some people die soon after birth, others in infancy, childhood, in their teens, or as young adults. These days, in the so-called developed countries, many live far longer than that, and the average lifespan has risen to 80 or beyond. So, what is it which determines how long each life lasts? Why are some lives short and harrowing, while others are long and rewarding? Is it accident or chance? Why is it that often privileged but feckless and lazy people seem to have the best of everything, while others, despite all their efforts, are condemned to soul-destroying poverty? Why are some people beset by never-ending problems and challenges? Why do some people achieve power, position and prominence, while others, equally talented, face rejection and obscurity?
The story of my life, just like yours, is unique. No two lives are ever the same. What we've experienced in this life was shaped by our actions, words, and even our thoughts in previous lives. Strange as it may seem to some, those very same actions, words, and thoughts are even now moulding our next lives. It's true to say that we're masters of our own destinies. We rise and we fall through our successes and failures, triumphs and tragedies, and pain and pride.
None of this happens by accident or by chance. Everything is subject to the overarching universal law of cause and effect. Every cause produces an effect. Every effect is the result of some cause. The law of cause and effect is known as the law of karma, which is derived from the Sanskrit word kri, meaning action. The law of karma is often called the law of laws because it rules supreme. Its aim is to ensure balance, harmony, and equilibrium in the universe. It isn't there to reward or punish as such, although this is the way it often appears. It's there to ensure that we learn essential lessons and benefit from our mistakes. Karma provides the Ariadne's thread on everyone's evolutionary voyage of discovery, pitfalls, perils, and pleasures. Without this guiding principle, we'd be lost.
There are many objections to reincarnation, and the chief one is that if we've been incarnated hundreds or even thousands of times, why can't we remember these past lives? Well, it's a fair question, and indeed some people do remember, but we'd need a phenomenal memory. And can any of us remember exactly what we were doing 3 years ago last Tuesday? Given the fact that we've all experienced pain and we've inflicted pain on other people, given the fact that we've had so many traumas, if we did remember past lives, the guilt and shame would be so enormous it might be an impediment to us leading our present lives. However, as we evolve further into the future, we may have a greater recall of past lives and not see them as separate lives at all, but as one life led both in and out of a physical body.
If we choose to look for it, there's considerable evidence for reincarnation, but little in the way of cast-iron proof that would convince the skeptics. One of the most powerful is when people experience a deep intuition or inner conviction that they've been here on Earth before. This can take a number of forms, and sometimes people do spontaneously recall past lives. Occasionally people have a powerful sense of resonance or even déjà vu when they visit a place for the first time or experience a new culture. This can be a strong sense of attraction or even repulsion. People travel to a strange city, and yet it's as if they've been there before. They're familiar with particular streets or buildings. They feel a natural attachment to the cultures of the ancient Greeks or the Celts or the Aztecs. It's not unusual for people to have fears and phobias about spiders, enclosed spaces, or the colour yellow. And these often appear irrational because they can't be linked to any particular traumas in people's current lives. Could these be the emotional residue of convulsive events in past lives? Could they even be the causes of illnesses in this life? Another persuasive argument is the case of childhood prodigies who show remarkable abilities from an early age. How was Mozart able to write his first piano sonata at the age of 4 and his first full opera at 7? How was he able to acquire such skills at an early age? How were other multi-talented geniuses like Leonardo da Vinci able to display excellence in so many areas? Had they served apprenticeships in previous lives? There's another phenomenon with well-documented evidence where individuals suddenly start speaking in foreign or even extinct languages of which they've had no previous knowledge at all. This is difficult to explain other than in terms of reincarnation. Since the 1950s, there's been extensive use of hypnosis to regress people back to previous lives, often for therapeutic reasons. And the results have often been remarkable, offering evidence that people's current life problems or diseases may have deep roots in past lives. For example, someone hanged or beheaded in a previous life may display neck problems in their current life. In many cases, this technique has proved highly beneficial and cured individual problems. During these sessions, those regressed were often able to provide impressive details of lives in previous eras, such things as food, clothing, social customs, architecture, and precise historical facts, often better than acknowledged experts in the field. In the 20th century, the American Edgar Cayce, known as the Sleeping Prophet, provided fascinating evidence of thousands of people's past lives, often indicating how diseases and illnesses had clear roots in past lives. This often happened remotely without Cayce having any direct contact with the individuals concerned. Although he didn't believe in reincarnation and had no medical training, his insights were profound. He simply lay down on a couch, went into a trance, and was then able to provide intricate details. In recent decades, thanks to improvements in medical science, increasing numbers of people have been revived who previously would have died, and considerable numbers have experienced near-death experiences, or NDEs. Those undergoing surgery sometimes find themselves floating above the operating table, and later report on remarks made by surgeons or events in the operating theatre. They often describe travelling through a tunnel or a void and emerging into a world of intense light. They experience a deep sense of peace and well-being. They often undergo some kind of life review. In many cases, they meet dead relatives, friends, or wise spiritual beings who take them on a journey through a beautiful landscape, often accompanied by music. Eventually, they reach some kind of border or boundary, and they're told it's now their time to return to physical life. Many are reluctant to do this, but they're informed that it's not yet their time to be here and they have to go back. Intriguingly, these near-death experiences often have remarkably similar features, no matter a person's race, age, religion, personal beliefs, or culture. As one researcher, Dr. Melvin Morse, commented, It doesn't matter who has the experience: Marines, punk rockers, real estate executives, housewives, ministers or holy men. They're all transformed by their exposure to the light. And in the vast majority of cases, those undergoing NDEs return profoundly changed people with no fear of death. Many show a deeper sense of spirituality, sometimes leading to major lifestyle changes. Over a 40-year period, American psychiatrist Dr. Ian Stevenson travelled the world and investigated 3,000 cases of children who claimed to remember past lives. He believed that heredity and environment couldn't explain the phobias, abilities, emotions, memories and illnesses, and proposed that reincarnation offered a better alternative. In one study, he identified 200 cases where birthmarks on children corresponded to wounds from guns and bladed weapons inflicted on that person the child claimed to have been in a previous life. He was able to corroborate some of these claims via autopsy reports along with police and medical records. Another fascinating idea to emerge from research into past lives is that individuals reincarnate not just to suit their own spiritual and evolutionary needs, but to fit in with the wider aims of others. It seems that each of us belong to soul groups, collectives of individuals who repeatedly reincarnate together in different roles, often in family scenarios, as if they're living out a karmic script. In one life, the individual is the father, in others the daughter, mother or cousin. Sometimes these relationships may play out in business relationships, in friendships, or even as enemies.
Death certainly isn't the dead-end street many people believe it is, and it certainly isn't the end of life or existence or consciousness. It's the start of a new chapter and the ultimate trajectory to being reborn in a new body with a fresh personality in a new era. Therefore, what we think and do and say and feel right now is shaping that life in the future. We are masters of our own destiny, but that destiny is entirely up to us.
And death shall have no dominion. Dead men naked, they shall be one with the man in the wind and the west moon. When their bones are picked clean and the clean bones gone, they shall have stars at elbow and foot. Though they go mad, they shall be sane. Though they sink through the sea, they shall rise again. Though lovers be lost, love shall not, and death shall have no dominion.
I'm restless in nirvana, I'm bored with perfect bliss. Metaphysical martinis got me in their grip. Get me back on the physical plane. Give me a body, give me a brain. Send me back to Earth school again. Send me back to Earth.